Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we decode the language of big business. Today we're diving into a Schedule 14A filing from Nektar Therapeutics. It's a proxy statement, and while that sounds super official and maybe a bit dull, trust me, there's some juicy stuff here, including a potential reverse stock split, which can be a sign a company's trying to boost its stock price. We'll break down what it all means, so stick around. Alright, so Nektar is asking its shareholders to vote on some pretty important things at their annual meeting, including electing directors, approving changes to their employee incentive plan, and even voting on whether to do a reverse stock split. Let's set the scene. These meetings happening May 23, 2025. Shareholders get to vote on things like who sits on the board of directors and big company decisions. It will be by live webcast only. First up, electing directors, 2 board members, Diana Brainerd and R. Scott Greer, are up for re-election. If they get the thumbs up, they'll be sticking around until 2028. Board members are like the company's oversight committee, making sure everything is running smoothly. Next, they want to make some changes to the company's incentive plan for the employees, specifically increasing the number of available shares of stock by 6 million. This helps Nektar attract and keep talent, as stock options and awards are big motivators. Shareholders also get to vote on who audits the company's books. This year, it's Ernst & Young. Think of it as hiring someone to double-check your homework. Here's where things get interesting, a say-on-pay vote. Shareholders get to voice their opinion on how much the top executives are getting paid. The vote isn't binding, but it sends a message to the board. Then they want to increase the number of authorized shares of common stock, going from 300 million to 390 million. This gives them more flexibility for things like raising money or making acquisitions, but it can also dilute the value of existing shares. And finally, the potential reverse stock split. This is where things get a little dicey. Nektar wants the option to combine shares anywhere from 1 for 2 to 1 for 40. So, for example, if they did a 1 for 10 reverse split, 10 of your shares would become 1 share. The price per share goes up, but you have fewer shares. Why do this? Usually it's to avoid being delisted from the stock exchange if the share price is too low, or to make the stock more attractive to investors. Now, a lot of the document is boilerplate explaining the voting process, who's eligible, and all that jazz. Pretty standard stuff. It lists the vote matters, electing directors, changes to compensation plans, accounting firm ratification, non-binding exec comp vote, plus those certificate of incorporation amendments. If you don't select, shares will be voted for the list of matters, but if you are a beneficial owner of shares, your shares will be voted on discretionary items. It lists what needs to happen to get a proposal accepted. Let's take a closer look at the proposal to amend the 2017 Performance Incentive Plan. As of early April, around 34.5 million shares were tied up in stock options and other awards, and they only had about 8 million shares left for future grants. This amendment would add another 6 million shares to the pot. This is important to keep employees motivated and incentivized. The weighted average exercise price of those stock options is about $5.52. No single person can get more than 3 million shares in options or stock appreciation rights each year. Stock appreciation rights basically let an employee benefit from the increase in stock price without actually buying the shares. The company can also defer payments of awards and even give out dividend equivalents, so it's like getting paid dividends on shares you don't fully own yet. There are also clauses on what happens to these awards if there's a change in control of the company, meaning a merger or acquisition. Finally, they have a clawback policy, which means if an executive gets paid based on financial results that later turn out to be wrong, they might have to pay some of it back. Now for the reverse stock split. They are trying to meet the Nasdaq's minimum bid price requirement. The minimum price needs to be $1. A reverse stock split is like taking all the small bills you have and exchanging them for a few bigger ones you have less pieces of money, but they are worth the same. This hopefully increases the price for the common stock. However, a reverse split is not without risks. Decreasing the liquidity of the stock is one possible downside. If they did a 1 for 40 reverse split, the number of shares would be about 4.6 million. Alright, let's talk about who owns the company. TCG Crossover owns a bit over 10% of the company, while BlackRock owns around 8.6%. Vanguard owns nearly 6.5%. The CEO, Howard Robin, owns a little over 2% of the company. This part's about making sure everyone's following the rules when it comes to reporting their stock ownership. It sounds like most people were on top of things, but there were a couple of late filings. Here they talk about any deals they've done with people connected to the company. Nothing too crazy, just a consulting agreement with someone who's now the interim CFO. The company paid FLG partners $460 and $850 in 2024 for the consulting services. They state which members are independent, meaning they don't have close ties to the company's management. The members of the compensation committee make sure that their members were free of outside influence. Looking at the director compensation, you see retainers and stock options. The annual retainer for non-employee directors is $55,000 per year. The chairperson makes $105,000. Now comes the really interesting part. This part of the document provides all the details to the named executive officers' NEO's compensation, which include Howard W. Robin, CEO, Sandra Gardner, interim CFO, Mark A. Wilson, Chief Legal Officer, and Jonathan Zalewski, Chief Research and Development Officer. As the company profile states, NTAR is in the high-risk, high-reward business of drug development, so they use stock-based compensation to align interest with long-term company success. They had a 2% increase to base salaries for NEO's tied CEO bonus to corporate goals. ICAD and had mostly option awards for NEO's. A big private placement with TCGX that generated $30 million. But remember, they cannot do these items. They deliver comp primarily with pay, can't reprice stocks without approval, have clawbacks, and utilize independent consulting firm. To make sure they are being competitive, they consider these peer companies: Key4D Molecular Therapeutics, BioAtla, Kezar Life Sciences, Nektar, Bluebird Bio, Cytomex Therapeutics, and so on. The salaries for each officer compared against previous years: CEO at $1,084,594 constant, other staff at roughly $500-700K range. With bonuses, the targets are another percentage of base salary. Trend and CEOs is around 100% of base, and all the other officers around 60%. The company set corporate objectives and the board determined their scores. 50% of effort into Resbergald, 30% research and development, 20% research and development, 20% financial to make the corporate performance rating ranged from 77% to 95%. Cut. Based on more achievements, it was bumped to 90% SAL. As a side note, it also shows that to be on management of a biofirm, you need to spend around 20 years in the industry to climb the ladder. There are many factors to account for, as discussed in the analysis. The SEC has a required notice that limits legal responsibility. Okay, so what's the big picture here? Nektar's trying to get its ducks in a row. They're incentivizing their employees, trying to boost their stock price, and keeping the auditors happy. From my perspective, I see a company at a crucial point. The reverse stock split, if implemented, is a double-edged sword. It could attract new investors, but it might also signal to the market that things aren't going so well. Their success hinges on their drug development pipeline, especially Resbergolder's-Lucan, which makes sense why a lot of corporate goals are tied to that. The risk for the company is definitely meeting the Nasdaq continued listing requirements, as well as success of the Resbergolder's-Lucan and NKTR-255 programs. In general, their debt levels are a bit concerning, so hopefully the board and executives have a plan to help the company succeed. Thanks for watching. If you found this corporate deep dive helpful, hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe for more decoded business insights.